What is up, people of Middle-earth? Welcome to my The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power review and breakdown. At the moment, I'm in the process of moving. All this stuff in the background is going to be gone. You may have already noticed the falcon that was there is already gone. So, unfortunately, today I don't have as much time as I would like to get into all of the teeny tiny details of what both episodes bring us. Just know that I will be putting a bit more of a breakdown into the third episode and so on and so forth, but I couldn't have this release day of The Rings of Power without giving some kind of review on it. And I already know that this will probably get quite a lot of dislikes because as it's no secret that the Lord of the Rings fan base, I wouldn't even go as far as saying split, but you may already know that a lot of fans out there really didn't like the look of this series, and they just felt like it was changing too much lore. There's various things in there that is, being implemented, such as original characters or, condensing the time in this adaptation. Ultimately, sure, Peter Jackson adapted The Lord of the Rings with some innovation in there, but to various Lord of the Rings fans out there, this isn't some more innovation that comes with adaptation. It's going all the way to deviation, as I like to say on the channel. When it comes to adapting something, you should always innovate, but not get to the extent of deviating. But with that being said, I've now had the chance to watch both episodes. I do not know even where to begin because it's two 1-hour episodes. And it was interesting reading the reviews for this, the critic reviews. Why I wanted to start there in this review is because it was getting a lot of praise, very interestingly. Now, the reason why that's interesting is because of what I just said. Even with the fan backlash, that doesn't mean that the critics would also hate the look of it, but I still somewhat expected the reviews to be somewhat echoing a little bit, maybe a little less harshly, of what some of the fans were saying. I'm sure you've read under lots of the trailers on YouTube videos, various quotes being like, evil cannot create anything new, they can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made. Dash J.R.R. Tolkien. And I'm sure I'm going to get some of those on this video. But let me just say my overall impression before we get into some of the breakdown of the episode also. And maybe some theories out there like who is the man who fell from the stars. And I have a pretty good idea about that, even though there is quite a bit of questioning among fans about it being a red herring for Gandalf and not actually Gandalf, but could it be Gandalf? So, what I want to say about this, and I've got a ton of bullet points here over on my other screen, is that this is expensive. We know how much money they've put into it, and I think that does show. It really does show, and one thing that I was happy about is that the way the episodes unfolded, the shots, for example, were beautiful. The way it was captured as well, to my surprise, didn't look kind of what The Hobbit did. For example, I think, I'm not alone in saying here, I think a lot of people have said this, that The Hobbit movies compared to the original movies, there's a lot more green screen and backdrops like that with how the industry changed since the early 2000s when Peter Jackson was doing the original Lord of the Rings films, to the point of where when you were watching The Hobbit, whether you love it or hate it, I just wasn't a fan of the way it looked, the way it was filmed. It just didn't feel like there was that kind of rusty authenticity to it. Now, with Amazon's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, don't get me wrong, it's got that modern glow to it. Of course it does. But it did feel like there was a lot more effort put into giving the authenticity of Middle-earth, even though some people might hate me for saying that. I'm just talking about the visuals here. I can't deny that these two episodes look good. And one thing I want to admit to as well, no matter how I feel about the lore changes, and we're going to get into some things there, I have been craving getting back into the realm of Middle-earth, with regards to video games and everything like that, ever since Shadow of Mordor or whatever. It's been kind of barren. There hasn't been like lots of stuff out there. This is the next thing, and as we know, Lord of the Rings fans, the community, it is such a great piece of work, which is why various people are so protective over it, and I subjectively have been wanting to see what this world was about. I heard all the criticisms. There are things that I agree with. There are some things that I think definitely go way too far, but I can't deny that there are some valid criticisms about how Amazon is adapting this. But subjectively, I will say right off the bat that I did enjoy these two episodes at face value. I felt like the music was really nice. It definitely was reminiscent of that Middle-earth feel that we've had established in prior projects. I do think that the cast was really decent. That's one thing that surprised me. The performances were really good, and I honestly mean that surprised me. I didn't think everyone was going to be trash or anything like that, but I think just about every character from Durin to, I don't know, freaking Elrond, to Galadriel. Everyone was pretty damn decent. And as for the way they structured everything from that of the Second Age, there are differences. There are quite a few differences, and there are somewhat holes being filled. For example, Amazon, if I remember correctly from the top of my head, they have the rights to, like, for example, The Lord of the Rings, but they can't really delve into other extended works, which are somewhat the foundation of what this world, lives and breathes through. For example, I don't believe they can adapt things from the Silmarillion. So there are certain gaps that they fill, even from when they're setting up the very beginning, when we have Galadriel with her brother. All of this intro to the first episode sets up what happened to Valinor, the two trees of Valinor, with how Morgoth arrived, Sauron's master. Sauron was under Morgoth. I don't really know who specifically I'm speaking to here, because I'm sure there's going to be Tolkien experts here far beyond me, but then there might be people being like, oh, this looks like a cool fantasy series. What's going on here? I remember Sauron from The Lord of the Rings. And I did like how that beginning part with Finrod and what he whispered in Galadriel's ear connected back to the end of the episode when she decided not to go to Valinor. But a lot of things like this within that of Galadriel's character are somewhat, and I'm sure some people will say is fan fiction. They say she's not the leader of the northern armies or anything like that, as we learned from Elrond, or things like this that we knew about going in if you paid close attention to the series through articles and whatnot. Now, my opinion on that is that I don't particularly mind. I'm gonna have to wait and see where it goes throughout the series, but I did enjoy Galadriel. I don't mind this innovation for her quest here. I do believe that she is just a character who is very determined after her brother Finrod's death. Now, that was accurate to what happened with how Sauron captured him, but they didn't get into as much detail as I would have liked to have seen there. Again, this is, I guess, what comes with adaptation and what could possibly alienate people. Don't get me wrong, it was awesome seeing after the two trees of Valinor fell, with regards to what happened with Morgoth. It would have been cool to see Morgoth brought back to Valinor, but we got to see Sauron, and in like this hall that we saw Galadriel go to later on, with all of these orcs and goblins and whatnot kneeling to him, and he was in his kind of typical Sauron attire, and as per the source material, he did pretty much kind of go missing in Middle-earth for around 5 centuries somewhere. So they do have gaps to fill there, and I felt like that journey at this part of the episode in the beginning was fairly parallel enough, if you will, to what was going on at that time. And I feel like Galadriel's mission to truly believe that evil never sleeps, it just waits, and if you become too complacent, you just give them an opportunity. This is kind of, I would say, not like a cliche story, but you can kind of tell where it's going. People don't quite believe it. Galadriel believes it. She wants to go on. Would Sauron really disappear? Obviously not, and it's only going to get worse, especially with quite literally the title of the show, The Rings of Power, so the forging of them with Lord Celebrimbor, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But all the show displayed here, and I get maybe they just didn't want to dive into it for simplicity's sake, because when you're making an episode like this, introducing everything, are you really going to dive madly into the history of what sets up the current rising evil? Because again, just to reiterate, Sauron is getting the Rings of Power forged. We're going to see that unfold, then eventually the One Ring, and then, everything happens from there on out for multiple seasons of which they plan. But before that, and what they showed here is that, after Morgoth died, he was just kind of chilling there, standing there menacingly, but they didn't show the confrontation with Luthien. Some of you may not know about that, but essentially he was defeated. Here, it doesn't really show that he was defeated. It just shows that, hey, my boss has died, here I am, and I've just gone quiet. Now, I understand, as I said, why they maybe wanted to do that, because what's more important to them is to tease the darkness, kind of akin, if I dare say it, to how they very subtly teased the beginning histories of the very beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring with Sauron's fall, and then you just want to get into the main story. So they didn't dive too much into it. Maybe we'll get more into what happened with what actually, defeated Sauron in that confrontation, and how he was unwilling to return to the West because he felt, I guess, pretty embarrassed about it, and then essentially with what we saw at the beginning of the episode, he hid for multiple centuries and slowly regained his power. Then he returned back, revealing himself again in subtle ways, gathering power in Mordor, but then taking on the form of an elf known as Anatar, and that's how we got to know Celebrimbor, and then the forging of the Rings of Power came. This isn't... The reason why I'm saying all of this, I hope nobody's pissed, is because it isn't madly spoilery. You already know that Sauron's the Dark Lord, and we're going to get into the whole Sauron, oh, is it the man that arrived? There is actually a really easy answer to that, in my opinion, with what the trades have reported for who is actually playing Sauron, and of whom we've even seen in the trailer. So if you don't want to know anything about that, then I guess maybe this video isn't for you, but to me it doesn't feel like much of a spoiler, and it feels kind of evident who the mystery man is. But the way they're adapting that with how we see Galadriel persist and persist and persist over many centuries, as she said, a year turned quickly into another year and then to a century. That was during the time, I guess, during the 5 centuries when Sauron was missing, but there were clues left behind, and as we see throughout these first couple of episodes, there are signs of his evil. Yet again, with adaptations, the way they're kind of going about this, I feel, is like a little bit different as well. For example, I wonder if he's already started building Barad-dûr in Mount Doom, or near Mount Doom, shall I say, and that's why the orcs we see in this episode have already amounted. Has he already started corrupting various hearts of men before getting in his elvish form and then appearing to the elves as a friend, of which, you know, Sauron the Deceiver begins his little Rings of Power quest? I expect differences there, and I don't think people should be angry at that with literally any adaptation that fans love, even with Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings. Little subtle changes like that with a way to kind of roadmap out your storytelling are to be expected, as long as, again, it doesn't go to deviation. So with regards to the whole Sauron presence, other than not really diving too deep into that little recap at the beginning with Galadriel talking about Morgoth and Sauron, Finrod and everything, it feels fairly typical of what I expected. Just would have been cool to see a little glimpse, you know, as she was talking about her brother Finrod, a little flash across the screen maybe with what happened at those events, with how Sauron went into a form of a wolf and then escaped in the form of a vampire and things like that. So in my honest opinion, all of this like beginning portion I felt was fairly decent, quite impressive visually, like really impressive visually. It looked gorgeous, and I'm not gonna lie about that. When they actually went to where Sauron was hiding out, even though now he's moved on to the next phase of his plan, and, you know, her elven party were just like, we really, you know, I don't think he's real. They come across Sauron's sigil, which was left behind for orcs to follow. This pops up again with Theo, Bronwyn's son, and that little freaking, I don't know what that blade is. It's clearly maybe just a blade of a follower of Sauron's with the sigil on it, but then again, it's like, you know, it's like growing with spiky ends, so I don't know if it's anything more significant. Feel free to lead your theories down in the comments below, because as much as I feel like I may know about Tolkien, which, you know, isn't at the peak of the peak, I'm definitely not pretending to be that. Some of you Tolkien heads who are more open to this series may want to lend your theories down, and I can't wait to read those. But then they came across a snow troll, and some people are bitching about this part with regards to the effects. I felt like that was fine. I do agree that I didn't really like how her whole party of elven warriors, like, don't forget that these elves are immortal, so for all we know, her elven party here are thousands of years old, very capable warriors, like extremely capable, yet the only one who could take a sword to the snow troll is Galadriel. Now, don't get me wrong, it looked really cool, and I'm not saying that Galadriel can't be a badass or anything like that, and I do feel like maybe we could have seen a little bit of a montage with how well she is prowessed with combat, but at the same time, she is thousands of years old herself, so there is a degree of self-explanatory nature to how skilled she is with combat. But the only thing I felt like wasn't really represented well here is how every other elf got bitch slapped, and it was Galadriel to be the one to completely own the snow troll. So all I'm asking for there is that, don't get me wrong, make Galadriel look badass, but maybe add a bit of fight from the other elves in your choreography to not make it so apparent with just how hard they are trying to just solely be like, hey, you know, Galadriel and everything like that. Again, I really like Galadriel in this show from what I've seen in the first 2 episodes. I like the little homages to the close-up shots of the eyes like we saw in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You can easily see what they're doing there. And I do feel like she is an echo of Galadriel that I'm so far happy with. It's just, yeah, I do understand certain criticisms with scenes like this. I'm not nearly going to go as harsh and, phrase it in such a way that, woman woke, Mary Sue this and that. I'm not really identifying that, although it did seem like a transparent, oh, bitch slap this elf, bitch slap this elf, bitch slap that elf, and, oh, Galadriel is the one, even though everyone there is capable. Just would have been cool. That's what I'm saying. Would have been cool to see the other elves in action. Now, after the title sequence, that's when we went some hunters out there, and, they've heard of Half-Foots, and it made me laugh a little bit with how they think they're, like, dangerous, but really, they are hobbits. The show calls them, like, the ancestors of hobbits, and that they're not really hobbits, but they quite literally are hobbits. But again, it's just like mankind. We go all the way back to cavemen, right? Now, these aren't quite the cavemen versions of hobbits, but they are just up the family tree by thousands of years. Now, I really like Nori. I like how these hobbits, Half-Foots if you will, are displayed in such a way where they haven't quite settled down yet. They do migrations, they are essentially nomads, and they move about. They talk about how, hunters in these parts, wolves, there's certain things that are happening to them that they notice because they are very in tune with the land. They don't rely on much other than their own people, and this was a good way as well to start to show how things are changing with how Sauron was fairly dormant, in hiding, ever since the fall of Morgoth, if you will, or should I more accurately say how he's defeated at the hands of Luthien, and now things are starting to change with his rise to power once again. Of course, there's little transparent teasers, I would say, transparent with Nori, because they want to set up the two aspects of, the hobbits we see in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I guess you could say, with how hobbits, in general, don't want to, go outside into the world and be inquisitive and wonder if there's anything more out there. They like their own little green dragon inn and stuff, and as with this place, they like their own little berry bush community. But there is the other side with Nori, which sets up how there are certain hobbits, like the Baggins one day, who are inquisitive, who do want to go out and see mountains and things like that. Then eventually we go to Lindon with Elrond. I thought that the actor behind Elrond did a decent job across both episodes. It already sets up how he's good with his words. I believe he even wrote that speech for Gil-galad the king there. But essentially, don't forget that this is Elrond thousands of years in the past, so he is, he's still very wise, don't get me wrong, but he's not quite the Elrond you'll see at the Fellowship Council. And he's informing Galadriel at this part that, she's kind of in trouble because in a way she's pissed off the king, but at the same time, he still might look past that and award you for what you've done because, spending centuries looking for the evil that could still be out there is a task that is almost unfathomable. Like, imagine a mission, serving some time in a military where, imagine doing that for centuries and being on an operation for centuries. So I think the king, Gil-galad, at this point is just wanting to put that to rest so they can enter the peace period, even though it's quite transparent that he does know there is something more out there. Again, this is exactly Galadriel's fear, the complacency, and almost here, knowing complacency. But long story short here, Gil-galad awards her and her party something that is fairly unrivaled in all their lore, as he said, and that is the opportunity to sail to the Undying Lands, Valinor, to spend the eternity there in peace. But she's like, well, shit. My mission is my brother's. She wants to find and eliminate that darkness because at the end of the day, she knows Sauron is out there. Do you really think he's just like, I'm going to crumble into nothingness? It's not really the case. As for Gil-galad's performance here, I mean, maybe it's because he was saying a lot of Elrond's words, but, I didn't know about the performance. It felt very, like this. And I feel like that's the only performance, really, I had a little bit of an issue with. It wasn't a mad gripe. It just felt like a bit, I don't know, over dramatic in a sense. I don't know. And Elrond, before this carving of her brother Finrod's tree, warns her that no one's refused the calling before. And Galadriel, as we know, essentially kind of gets talked into going, but eventually dips out, quite literally, into the ocean. This is where we go to the Southlands, of where Sauron's got a crop up quite a bit, if that wasn't obvious enough in these first two episodes, and we get, I believe, two original characters, Arondir and Bronwyn. Essentially, it's very obvious he loves this woman, and she has a son, Theo, who finds that sigil of Sauron on that blade, perhaps from a battle long ago. As Arondir says to Bronwyn, I believe maybe it was in episode 2, that the people of that town they go to that gets completely sacked by orcs were very faithful to Morgoth way back when. But they still keep a little bit of a watchful eye. That is until Galadriel returns after 5 centuries and the king enters the time of peace, which was a bit soon to say, especially as it's kind of obvious that Gil-galad knows there's something more out there. I mean, that leaf dropped and a little bit of freaking rot, starts appearing on the leaf, and if you had subtitles on, it literally said whispers of black speech, the black speech of Mordor. So yeah, like, shit's coming our way. Arondir will be quite useful, I suppose, with identifying Sauron's coming evil, because, you've got poisoned grass that's turned into weeds. There's later on a cow that isn't milking properly because it's bleeding. And yeah, all kinds of other disturbing signs. But let's skip to the next big thing, and that is Gil-galad introducing Lord Celebrimbor to Elrond, and that's because they want to set their sights on a new sunrise, and he is the greatest of elven smiths, and he is the one who goes on to forge the rings of power, the rings that are bound to the One Ring, and that's how Sauron eventually, as, narrated to us by Galadriel in the Fellowship of the Ring, one by one, the races of Middle-earth fell to him. That was the whole point in forging them, albeit Sauron, appeared as Anatar, of which I assume we'll see, unless there's some changes, and deceived Celebrimbor, befriended him. So Celebrimbor will go on, and it's going to be interesting with Elrond's collaboration here, I suppose, to see that unfold. But the end of the episode gets to the point of, as we discussed, we have Galadriel dip into the seas, which, oh my god, yeah, is it really? I mean, I know she's an elf, but imagine treading water for that long and swimming. But either way, we have this comet arrive, and there's this man that, lands in the middle. Now, there's lots of theories that this is Sauron, because, you have a bit of a pattern that is reminiscent to the eye. The thing is, I'm just going to lay it out on the table now. I believe it was reported that a certain actor, the person you're seeing on screen right now, is actually Sauron, likely in the elven form of Anatar, the one who will go on to befriend Lord Celebrimbor. So, I mean, I could be wrong, and who knows, it could be a switch like some of you are claiming, like a red herring, making us think that it's that person. But again, just like going off the source material, and yes, I know they're going to change things up and people are going to say that, but Sauron, I don't see how he could appear in any other way than the way he's meant to deceive Celebrimbor, and that is in his elven form. Like, you see that dude there on screen with the short hair. I wish they went with longer hair. The more beautiful hair of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts and whatnot, but we're gonna have to wait and see. For all we know, that could grow, because, we're not gonna get anywhere near to the time of that first battle of, when Sauron was defeated at the hands of Isildur. Even though we're going to see Isildur in this series, but I need to stay on track, I don't think this dude is Sauron. I think it has to be another lore change here, and that is the Istari, when they were sent down, such as Gandalf, Saruman the White, to Middle-earth in an effort to basically have aid towards those who oppose Sauron himself. It's just, I think the change they're doing here is that they're not revealing who he is straight away for the people in the audience who, are very fresh and not so into the know of Lord of the Rings, even though, as I acknowledge, this is an adaptation, so there are subtle changes to be made. I think this is just, they're doing it a bit earlier. As we know, the timeline is being condensed. For crying out loud, Isildur's going to be in this. So I think, even though I believe the Istari was sent down in the Third Age, I think they're doing it in the Second Age here. Gandalf's here a little bit earlier. They've done it so that he's placed, and, there's that relationship between the Hobbit ancestors, which is why Gandalf becomes so fond of Hobbits later on. That's probably the angle they're going for. I know where people are coming from with show surprises and whatnot, but I just can't see Sauron being, guided by Nori in a bloody cart that is essentially like a wooden wheelchair, and he rolls down the hill. I just don't think that's Sauron. I think they're playing an ambiguous Gandalf origin tale here, and yes, he can't communicate right now, and there's subtle differences here and there. And I know in the source material he appeared as a much older man. It's just, again, for adaptation's sake, they're having him kind of old, but not fully grey hair, and eventually he'll get his name, or maybe he'll remember more things. But he does come down here with a certain amount of knowledge, because as we learn in the second episode, he's trying to find that location as a part of that constellation, of which Nori may know the answer to, because that goes back to Saruk's book. In that little ancient half-foot book, there are records of, the histories of various races, I believe, and he knows about the stars. So that's probably how they're going to help out the, younger Gandalf there, I guess. But I could be wrong. I do want to put it down there. I could be wrong, but I just don't see, maybe this is the whole point, Sauron having a comeback and is falling down a freaking hill in a little wooden wheelchair. It's likely a young Gandalf. Now, in episode 2, there are certain other parts with regards to what I think is an early Gandalf that I think are meant to make you think, oh, could he be Sauron? Because there's certain, like, crooked looks that he gives or whispers. It doesn't, I do want to know, it didn't say black speech this time. It just says whispered voices that I think are meant to throw you off. But again, I'm very confident it is a younger Gandalf, of whom was sent down with the other wizards. It's just, I guess he's a bit clueless at this point in time, or he's trying to communicate with not having learned the language and things like that. It gets to the point of the Fireflies where I feel like there's little homages to Gandalf with how he communicated with the freaking moths back in Lord of the Rings and whatnot, and how he's communicating and talking to the Fireflies, and he's really sad when they fall. I think that's another demonstration in how he is an Astari, a wizard essentially, sent down to help stop this evil that is spreading, diseased animals and stuff, these flies dying, and when he looks back to Nori in that moment, he's really sad. So I don't think that's Sauron. I know I keep going around in circles here, but hey, if you want to debate that, I welcome it. I would love to hear your perspective. Meanwhile, with Galadriel, we have her, wash up on that little shipwreck with other people who got completely owned by that worm in the sea. And the only person left is Halbrand, I believe his name was, another original character. So this is a fine example, similar with potentially the origin of Gandalf there, coming a bit earlier, a bit younger, and other changes. We have another change with that of Galadriel and this kind of injection into her history with what they're making here in this telling of the Second Age and Sauron's rise to power, with her being a bit more involved. There are things in the lore that don't necessarily dispute this outright, with her having some larger role to play, I believe. Do correct me if I'm wrong there. I think there could be something that said that she actually didn't return to Middle-earth or something during around about these times. I could be remembering things wrong, but that might be why people are pissed saying, well, how is this remotely accurate? But she is obviously going to go on a journey with him. She's been seeking any kind of answer for 5 centuries to where Sauron could have been, going to, and Halbrand here basically gives her the answer, a good answer, with how there's orcs that have been sighted in the southern lands, and I believe that is where we're with Arondir and Bronwyn. So she's like, orcs? Because don't forget that her elven party reported to her that an orc hasn't been sighted in, it could have been decades or centuries, just like one orc. So the fact that there are orcs is telling her that, he must be rallying some power over in this location where we visit the men in both episodes. Meanwhile, with Arondir and Bronwyn, they see that the nearby town's completely been decimated, and we have orcs making tunnels, goblins and whatnot, all the way into their town. And that's where Theo, hides away in a cupboard, and all of that stuff unfolds. The men of the town are just like, oh yeah, we want proof. We don't want gossip. And she essentially slams down the head off that orc and presents it. So now they know, okay, oh shit, like the threat is real. This all makes sense because when Sauron was regaining power, even before he befriended Celebrimbor, orcs of old, of that of Morgoth, were once again brought about. So that's why we're now seeing them pop up. And eventually, obviously, we're going to see that tower constructed with, other aspects of the episode with regards to how Celebrimbor said to Elrond that he wants to build this unprecedented tower that can build a forge that has been unseen ever before. And I guess that's exactly what he's going to use to make the Rings of Power. And you can see little foreshadowings of this in his dialogue to Celebrimbor with how he's done with just making, simple jewelry. He wants to devise something of real power. And oh boy, when we have Sauron in the deception of Anatar, yeah, he's going to definitely put him to work on some very powerful things that will ultimately lead to Sauron's dominion. Now, as for the whole Khazad-dûm side of things, it was quite cool seeing that entranceway. I believe that is the same entranceway we see in the Fellowship. It's just obviously thousands of years before, so that waterfall hasn't created that little freaking pond, if you will, with the monster inside it. And I guess in this adaptation, I don't think it's canon to the Lord of the Rings, so that doorway might be different because of that reason. Again, do correct me if I am wrong. I thought Khazad-dûm looked amazing. We have Prince Durin being very pissed with Elrond because, even though 20 years isn't a long time to an elf, it is for him. So he missed his wedding, the birth of his children. They had quite a great friendship once. This amounts in some dwarven activities and whatnot, and he essentially has dinner with him and his wife. I believe her name was Disa, and they essentially make up, and he said that he's gonna contact his dad about whatever, Elrond has to propose here. That, towards the end of the episode, resulted them into opening a box of Mithril. Even though we didn't see what was inside, his father is quite paranoid. He doesn't think it's a coincidence that he's arrived just as I believe they've made the first discovery of a metal that could, like, literally change so much, and that is Mithril. And then at the end of episode 2, we have Galadriel and Halbrand wash up among the ship, and I believe those are the Númenóreans. You may remember in the trailer, we know they are going to go to Númenor, which has a very interesting future ahead of it. But yeah, Númenor, the land of the men, and Dunedain and whatnot, that's going to be an interesting thing to follow. But I know I've skipped over various details, but those are the main events, I would say, from both episodes. And just looking at it in a couple of ways. Objectively, I do see differences there that are going to, I guess, alienate Lord of the Rings purists. But for me, as you know, I know some people will be like, you can't be a Lord of the Rings fan if you enjoy this. I do subjectively, you know, rather than objectively, still enjoy this. I'm still willing to see where it goes. I don't by any means think it's a dumpster fire. I feel like comments like that, I mean, people can feel how they want, but I can't look at this and think absolute utter garbage and trash and piece of crap and everything. I just don't really see that. Like, I really don't. I'm not saying it's absolutely mind-blowingly incredible, but as a man who just wants to, like, enter Middle-earth again through some medium, and looking at this as an adaptation, wanting to see where it goes and seeing what's been offered in these first 2 episodes, I do think it was pretty decent. I'm not going to lie there. I'm not saying the events of the Second Age, and even then they're condensing other things into the Second Age, are going to be executed perfectly. That's yet to be seen. And there already has been some differences. But again, I think that is to be expected with adaptations, but I feel like some things could be deviated to the point of alienating certain fans. But for me, where I'm set right now, I enjoyed this first 2 episodes. I feel like the world building, you know, in terms of a pacing, some people were saying it was very slow. Maybe it's just me and my interest in it, but I wasn't encumbered by a slow pacing. I can identify it, but I was intrigued to learn about how certain things unfolded. And obviously, with such a rich and vast world, even if they're changing things as Middle-earth, they need to set up some world building there. So I don't think that marked it down massively in terms of, you know, slow pacing and whatnot. So I do feel like the foundations of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, at least in specifically the first 2 episodes, I did subjectively quite enjoy what I saw. But I know there's going to be quite a controversial response to this from various fans. Let me know what you thought, in all honesty. Are you a Lord of the Rings purist who just views this as a bastardization? Are you a Lord of the Rings fan like myself who is kind of open to it and just kind of, you know, seeing certain things that you're like, but then there's other things where you're like, okay, but then there's other things that are like, Or are you just a fan who has come into it and is just like, hey, cool fantasy show, looking forward to see where this goes, and you don't have much ties that behold you to the lore of the Lord of the Rings? You know, there's quite a few audiences this could be marketed to, and I think, from my perspective, the mass normie audience, if you will take to this quite well, because I don't think they're going to be as alienated by certain things. I think there's certain fans that just understandably, from their perspective, won't see this any other way and will just be too turned off by certain changes. And there are certain fans in the middle who have like a modicum of knowledge, like myself, who identify certain things, but also identify some of the achievements they have done in these first few episodes and maybe are willing to see where it goes. And I think I land in that middle spectrum, and I was entertained. So let me know what you think if you've seen it. Let me know if you're looking forward to it even more. Let me know, of course, your theories with regards to the Comet Man. I think I've spoken enough now. I will be getting into more specific breakdown details when we get weekly episodes from here on out. If you're interested, do let me know if you're interested in seeing weekly episodes, because if people are just going to absolutely hate it on the channel, then obviously I will listen. If you did enjoy this video, would appreciate a like. Don't have a huge Lord of the Rings fan base on this channel, but as always, I strive to offer a variety of content on the channel, so if you want to support me there, subscribing as well can help, but most definitely a like would go a long way. Links as always in the description down below. If you want to support me further, there's a join button, a super thanks button, but I think that is everything, so I'm going to love you and leave you now. People of Middle-earth, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and by the way, moving over the next couple of days, so videos might, you know, or set background could be all over the place. Bear with me there. It should look good eventually. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.